They put me in handcuffs in front of my own house. My briefcase was still in my hand when the first agent grabbed my wrist. My neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, stood on her porch with her mouth open, her pruning shears hanging useless at her side, and 4 men in tactical vests screamed at me to get on my knees on the driveway I had just resealed the week before. 3 months later, those same 4 men would be standing before a Senate subcommittee, and not one of them could look at the cameras. But that morning, I didn't know any of that. That morning, I was just a man trying to get home. My name is Marcus Ellison. I was 38 years old, a senior structural engineer at Harman & Briggs, a firm that had spent 12 years building bridges, overpasses, and federal infrastructure across 6 states. I drove a blue Volvo that I'd paid off 2 years early. I owned my home, a 3-bedroom colonial on Devereux Street in Fairfield, Maryland, outright. Not renting, not leasing, owned. I had the deed framed in my home office because the day I signed it was the day I understood what my parents had worked for when they crossed from Georgia to Maryland with $40 between them and a refusal to accept the ceiling someone else had built for them. My father used to say, "The deed is the argument. Carry it." I never thought I'd need to carry it literally. My wife Diane was a high school chemistry teacher who smelled like lavender soap in the mornings and left half-finished cups of tea on every flat surface in the house. We had a daughter, Lily, who was 9 years old and had recently decided she was going to be an astronaut and a chef simultaneously, and who saw no contradiction in that whatsoever. Every morning before I left, I made her a specific breakfast: scrambled eggs with exactly 1 slice of buttered toast, cut diagonally, because she had informed me at age 6 that triangles taste better. It was the kind of ritual that had become sacred without either of us deciding it should be. I would stand at the stove in the gray morning light while the radio murmured in the background, and Diane would come in still half asleep with her tea, and Lily would drag herself to the table with her hair in her face and her backpack already falling off one shoulder. And for those 20 minutes before the day took us all in different directions, the world was exactly the right size. The first strange thing happened on a Tuesday in early October, about 3 weeks before everything came apart. I pulled into the driveway after a long site inspection and noticed a sedan parked half a block down the street. Dark gray, government plates, no markings. I noticed it, the way you notice something that doesn't belong in a place you know by heart. I told myself it was nothing. A surveyor, maybe. A federal contractor for the road project that had been circulating in the community newsletter. I went inside, ate dinner, helped Lily with her fractions homework, and let myself forget about it. The second time I saw the car was Thursday. Same spot. Same sedan. This time the engine was running. I sat in my own driveway for a long moment and stared at it in the rearview mirror, and I felt something shift in the center of my chest. Not quite fear, but the thing that arrives just before fear, the low-frequency hum of something being wrong. I went inside and said nothing to Diane. She had enough weight that week, a student in crisis she'd been staying late for, parent-teacher conferences building on her calendar. I didn't want to load her with something that was probably nothing, but it wasn't nothing. The following Monday morning, I was loading my briefcase into the car when the man in the gray sedan crossed to the sidewalk in front of my house. He was white, mid-40s, with a broad flat face that seemed engineered against registering surprise. He didn't approach me. He just stood on my sidewalk and looked. I met his eyes across the hood of my car, and he held my gaze just long enough to make it deliberate, just long enough to make sure I understood it was a choice, before he looked away and pulled out his phone. I stood there with my hand on the car door for a moment I still can't measure. Then I got in and drove to work and tried to think about load-bearing calculations and couldn't think about anything else at all. That night, after Diane fell asleep, I sat at the kitchen table with a glass of water that went warm in my hands, and I went back through my own life like a man emptying his pockets after losing something he couldn't name. I thought about every project I'd ever filed, every report, every permit application, every subcontractor invoice. I thought about the federal bridge contract we'd closed in August, the one that had required 3 rounds of security clearance paperwork. I thought about a colleague, Derek, who had been flagged for something minor last year. A discrepancy in a subcontractor's records that turned out to be an accounting error on the contractor's end. Nothing to do with Derek at all. I turned over every stone I could find. I found nothing underneath any of them. I went to bed at 2 a.m. and told myself I was building a story out of a parked car and a man standing on a public sidewalk. I almost believed it. 2 weeks after that Monday, on a Wednesday in late October, I was coming home from the office at 6:47 in the evening. I remember the time because I had called Diane from the car, and she said to hurry because Lily had made a drawing she wanted to show me before bed. I turned onto Devereux Street and saw the vehicles before I understood what they were. 3 black SUVs and a white tactical van, and 4 men in vests with federal agent across the chest already moving toward my car before I had fully stopped. I opened my door because I thought there had been some kind of incident on the street and they needed help. I stepped out still holding my briefcase. The broad-faced man from the sidewalk, the one who had looked at me, closed the distance in 4 steps and took hold of my arm. "Marcus Ellison?" he said. His voice was the voice of someone who had done this many times and felt nothing about it. "Yes," I said. My voice came out even, which surprised me because my heart was striking my ribs so hard I could feel it in my back teeth. "What is this?" "Hands behind your back," he said. He was already pulling at my wrist. The briefcase hit the driveway. The latch broke. Papers scattered across the asphalt. "I live here," I said. I forced my voice to stay level. I had learned to force my voice level in situations where something inside me was screaming. "This is my house. You need to tell me the—" He didn't answer. The cuffs went on. Cold. They cinched tight, and the sound they made, that metallic double click, was the kind of sound that empties your body of everything warm at once. The coldness traveled up my forearms and into my shoulders. My knees wanted to buckle, but I kept them locked. I would not go to the ground in front of my house. Mrs. Patterson was on her porch. She had dropped her pruning shears at some point without noticing. Her husband Phil had come outside 2 doors down and was shading his eyes with one hand as if the scene were too bright to look at directly. 2 kids on bikes had stopped at the end of the block and gone completely still. "I want to know the charge," I said. My jaw was tight. I was studying the man's face for something. Guilt, hesitation, the flicker of error, and finding nothing. "You are legally required to tell me the charge." He said one word. "Fraud." The world didn't spin. I didn't collapse. What happened was quieter and more total than either of those things. Everything inside me went perfectly, absolutely still. Fraud. I turned the word over the way you turn a stone over to examine what lies beneath it. Fraud. In 22 years of professional life, I had never had a complaint filed against me. I submitted accurate reports. I paid my taxes the week they were due. I had more professional certifications than anyone at my firm, and I had earned every one of them. "What fraud?" I said. Not a question. A demand for specificity. He took my arm and steered me toward the white van. He did not answer. I looked back over my shoulder at the house. The front door had opened. Diane was standing on the porch with Lily's hand in hers. Lily was holding the drawing she had made to show me. Something in orange and blue, an astronaut or a rocket. I couldn't tell from that distance. She was holding it up. She hadn't fully understood what she was watching yet. That image? My daughter on the porch of our house holding up her drawing while I was walked to a federal van in handcuffs is the one I carry. It is the one I will always carry. It is also the one that, 3 months later, I would describe in detail to a room full of lawyers, cameras, and a senator who would go pale listening to it. But first I had to survive what was coming. They held me for 11 hours. The interrogation room at the Federal Processing Center on Greenbelt Road smelled like synthetic lemon cleaner and old coffee, the kind of smell that has soaked into the walls over decades and never fully leaves. I sat at a metal table with my wrists on the cold surface and counted the acoustic tiles in the ceiling because it gave me something to do with my mind, while the rest of me tried to hold itself together. A different agent came in after the first hour, younger, brown-haired, with a manner that wanted to be friendly and landed somewhere just short of it. "Mr. Ellison," he said, pulling out the chair across from me with a scrape that seemed designed to be loud. "I want to get you home tonight. Help me help you." I want my attorney," I said. I had said it 6 times already. I kept my voice level each time. "I'm not answering any questions without counsel present." "Nobody's questioning you. I'm just talking," he said, spreading his hands on the table with an openness that was entirely performed. "There's been some confusion around some invoices tied to the Harmon & Briggs federal contract, bridge project out of Baltimore County. Numbers that don't line up. We just need you to walk us through." "Attorney," I said again. Flat. Final. He looked at me for a long moment, and then stood up and left the room without another word. The door closed with a sound like a period at the end of a sentence. The confusion around those invoices, I would later discover, was not confusion at all. It was something far more deliberate, and it had a name, and that name belonged to a man I had trusted. What I didn't know yet, what I could not have imagined sitting alone in that room, was that 3 weeks earlier my colleague Derek Marsh had been approached by the lead agent, a man named Supervisory Agent Carl Vreeland, who had told Derek that the agency was building a fraud case around the Harmon & Briggs bridge contract, and that Derek himself was the primary suspect. There was apparently evidence of bid manipulation and falsified structural certifications. Derek had gone cold with fear, and then Vreeland had laid out what he later called an opportunity. Derek's name could be removed from the file, he said. If Derek could provide documentation implicating someone else on the project, someone whose name was already on the key reports, whose signature appeared on the certifications, the agency would redirect its attention. Derek had gone home that night and spent 3 days not sleeping, and then he had provided the documentation. My name on reports I had legitimately signed. My name on invoices that had gone through normal channels. All of it reframed, recontextualized, rearranged into something that looked, from a certain careful angle, like something else entirely. I didn't know any of this when they released me at 4:30 in the morning. I walked out into a parking lot that was empty except for a few security lights buzzing yellow overhead, and I called Diane, and when she picked up I could hear from the first syllable that she had not slept. She said nothing for a moment when she heard my voice. Then she exhaled, the long shaking exhale of someone who has been holding their breath for hours, and said she was on her way. While I waited, I sat on a concrete curb with my forearms on my knees and stared at the asphalt. My briefcase was gone, still in evidence somewhere. My jacket was wrinkled. My phone battery was at 4%. The latch on my briefcase was broken. That detail, for some reason, was what I kept coming back to. The latch, and the papers scattered across my driveway, and the sound of the cuffs closing. There was a payphone-era newspaper box at the edge of the parking lot with a padlock on it, and in the yellow security light I could see my own reflection in the scratched plastic face of it, distorted, slightly yellowed, barely recognizable. When Diane pulled up and I got into the car, she looked at me the way she had only looked at me once before, when her mother had died. That specific look that means someone is searching your face for damage. I told her I was fine. She didn't believe me and didn't say so. She reached over and put her hand on top of mine on the center console and drove us home without speaking, and I was grateful for the silence the way you're grateful for shade on an August afternoon. Lily was asleep. Her drawing was on the kitchen table, an orange rocket with 2 figures inside it, both with curly hair. She had labeled one Dad in large, careful letters. By 9 a.m., I had called my attorney, a woman named Patricia Graves, who had been my personal counsel since I bought the house. Patricia was 61 years old, precise as a scalpel, and had a habit of listening without moving her face at all, which unnerved most people and which I had come to find deeply reassuring. I sat in her office that same morning while she read through the arrest paperwork I had requested, her reading glasses low on her nose, and I watched her expression do something I had never seen it do before. It went briefly, quickly, very still. "Probable cause affidavit," she said without looking up. "Signed by Supervisory Agent Carl Vreeland." She set the page down and looked at me over her glasses. "Marcus, this affidavit cites 3 invoices and a structural certification report as evidence of fraudulent activity." She paused. "What is your recollection of those specific documents?" I told her. "Precisely. Date, project, chain of approval, every name in the sequence. And Derek Marsh's role in the certification process?" she said. The name sat in the air between us for a moment. "He was my co-reviewer," I said. "His name is on the same documents. His signature precedes mine on 2 of the 3 reports." Patricia took her glasses off and set them on the desk. "Then I need you to get me every email, every project file, every version history you have access to," she said. Her voice was even and quiet, in a way that meant the situation was serious. "And I need you to understand that what happened to you yesterday was not a mistake. This was a targeted action. Someone built this." She paused again. "And I think we can prove it. That night I did not sleep. Diane sat with me until 2 in the morning before I sent her to bed. I made a pot of coffee that I barely touched, and sat at the kitchen table in the dark with my laptop open, pulling every project file from the firm's server that I still had access to. My credentials hadn't been suspended yet, which told me Harmon and Briggs was waiting to see what the agency's case looked like before they made a move. I found the version histories. I found the metadata on the documents. I found something that Patricia had not yet found, and when I found it, I set my mug down very carefully on the table and sat for a long moment without moving. There was a revised version of the structural certification report, the one Vreeland's affidavit cited as fraudulent, that had been uploaded to the project server 11 days before my arrest. The original version, which I had authored and signed, showed normal load calculations and standard subcontractor billing. The revised version had altered figures in 2 columns of the billing annex. The metadata showed the revision had been made from Derek Marsh's workstation at 11:47 p.m. on a Wednesday, 3 days after Vreeland's first meeting with him, based on the timeline I would later reconstruct. I printed it. My hands were steady. That surprised me. I had expected them to shake, but they didn't. They were absolutely steady on the keyboard, steady on the printer tray, steady as I stapled the pages together and placed them face down on the table next to the coffee pot. I sat back in my chair and looked at the dark window above the sink. Outside, the neighbor's porch light was on across the street. A car passed slowly. The refrigerator hummed. Everything was very quiet, and in that quiet, I felt something I did not expect to feel. Not rage, not grief, but something cold and sharp and clarifying. I had been handed the weapon. All I needed now was the room to use it. 3 days later, Patricia convened a meeting. Present, myself, Patricia, a Bivens action specialist named Howard Fenn, who she had brought in from Washington, and This was the part I had not anticipated. An investigator from the Department of Justice's Office of Inspector General, named Renata Vasquez, who had received an anonymous complaint about Agent Vreeland's conduct, and had been, as it turned out, already building a parallel inquiry for 2 months. Renata was small, dark-haired, and had the focused attention of someone who had been doing this long enough to be unsurprisable. She looked at my metadata printout for approximately 40 seconds before she looked up at Patricia. "This is the 3rd time Vreeland's name has appeared in a coercion complaint in 18 months, she said. "He's been building cases by flipping co-workers against each other. His close rate looks excellent on paper. Nobody looked at the machinery behind it." "Until now," Patricia said. The confrontation happened on a Thursday morning, 5 weeks after my arrest, in a conference room at the U.S. Attorney's Office that smelled of carpet cleaner and old ambition. Vreeland was there with his supervisor, a deputy assistant director named Kowalski, who had the look of a man who already suspected the meeting was going to be the worst hour of his professional life. Patricia sat across from them. Howard Fenn sat beside her. Renata Vasquez sat at the head of the table with a manila folder in front of her that she did not open for the first 15 minutes. I sat to Patricia's left. I had not spoken a word since we entered. Kowalski attempted an opening, something about collaborative resolution and the agency's commitment to due process, and Patricia let him finish before she pushed the metadata printout to the center of the table. "Agent Vreeland," she said, "this document was revised from your employee's workstation 3 days after you met with him privately in a meeting that does not appear in any official case log. Can you explain that timeline?" Vreeland looked at the document. His jaw worked once. He glanced at Kowalski. "I'd need to consult with counsel before—" "The revision timestamp is 11:47 p.m., Patricia continued, as if he hadn't spoken. "Building security logs show Derek Marsh badged out at 11:52 p.m. the same night. His own phone's GPS confirms he was on site. We have the server logs, the badge records, and the original document stored in an off-site backup that predates the revision by 6 months. She paused and folded her hands on the table. "Your affidavit cited a document that didn't exist in its current form until after you met with Mr. Marsh. You arrested my client based on fabricated evidence, and we are going to demonstrate that in federal court unless this office immediately moves to expunge Mr. Ellison's arrest record, issue a formal public statement acknowledging the absence of probable cause, and open a full internal review into Agent Vreeland's conduct in this and prior cases." The room was silent. Kowalski had gone the particular shade of gray that men go when they understand the full weight of what is in front of them. Vreeland stared at the table. I looked at him. I looked at him with the quiet attention of someone who has decided they have nothing more to lose from looking, and he did not meet my eyes. "One more thing," I said. It was the first time I had spoken. My voice came out even and quiet, and somehow that made it carry further than I expected. "My daughter was standing on the porch holding a drawing when your agents walked me to that van. She was 9 years old, and she was holding up a picture she made for me. I need you to understand that I will describe that moment in exactly that detail in every room this case takes me into. Every hearing, every deposition, every camera." I paused. "So I'd think very carefully about what you decide to do next." Kowalski reached over and wrote something on a notepad and slid it to the government attorney beside him. The attorney read it and nodded. The expungement was filed within 72 hours. Vreeland's personnel file was pulled for review by the OIG the following week. The review found irregularities in 4 prior cases. 2 involved coercion of witnesses. 1 involved a warrantless search justified after the fact with a retroactively obtained affidavit. In all 3 prior cases, a minority subject had been the original target. Vreeland was suspended without pay pending further investigation. Derek Marsh resigned from Harman & Briggs and faced a separate civil action. Harman & Briggs issued a statement expressing full support for me and offered a reinstatement with back pay for the 3 weeks I had been on involuntary leave. I took the back pay. I did not return to Harman & Briggs. Patricia filed the Bivens action against Vreeland in his individual capacity, as the law requires. Howard Fenn filed a parallel complaint under the Federal Tort Claims Act against the agency itself. The Senate Judiciary Subcommittee requested my testimony 8 weeks after the OIG review became public. I flew to Washington on a Tuesday in January, and I sat at a long table under bright lights, and I described every detail with the same steady voice I had used in that conference room. The cuffs, the driveway, the broken briefcase latch, the papers scattered on the asphalt, and the orange rocket, and the word "Dad" in large, careful letters. Vreeland sat 3 tables behind me with his attorney, and did not look at the cameras once. The civil settlement was finalized on a Friday afternoon in early March. I won't say the number because the number is not the point, though it was significant enough that Patricia allowed herself a rare, brief smile when the wire confirmation came through. What I will say is that on the afternoon the settlement was signed, I drove home on Devereux Street and pulled into my driveway, the one I had resealed the week before my arrest, the one where my briefcase had hit the asphalt and broken open. And I sat in the car for a long moment before going inside. Lily was in the kitchen doing homework. She looked up when I came in and said, without preamble, "Dad, can a rocket be shaped like a triangle? Because I want mine to have 3 sides." "Yes," I said. "A rocket can be any shape you make it." She considered this, nodded, and went back to her homework. Diane came in from the hallway and looked at me with a question in her expression, and I shook my head in a way that meant, later. It's done. She exhaled the way she had in the car that night outside the processing center, that long, unspooling breath, and came over and put her hand on my arm. On the kitchen table, under Lily's math worksheet, was the drawing, the orange rocket with 2 curly-haired figures inside. My daughter had kept it there all these months, as if she knew it needed to stay out. I picked it up, looked at the careful letters. Dad. I set it back down on the table, and for the first time since October the kitchen felt like the right size again.